By late afternoon, the riverfront arts district in Asheville was already alive. Music drifted out of open doors. A drum beat came from one studio. A saxophone tested a few notes in another. People moved along the wet brick walkways with coffee cups, paper bags, and bright umbrellas, even though the sky was still only gray and sticky. Darlene Watkins stood in the front room of her print shop, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked out at the busy street. Her shop sat in an old brick building not far from the French Broad River. The front window was wide and a little crooked. It showed off stacks of posters, small art prints, and cards with deep black lines. In the back, down a narrow set of steps, sat her old iron letterpress. It was big, dark, and steady as a stove. Darlene had bought it 10 years ago from a closed school in western North Carolina. She had rebuilt it, one piece at a time. It had paid her rent, fed her, and printed work for nearly every gallery, band, and food truck in the district. She checked the clock on the wall. 5:30. First Friday would bring the biggest crowd of the month. It usually did. People came to walk, look, listen, and spend a little money. For Darlene, that meant good sales. She had one more run of poster cards to finish before dark. She turned toward the back room to get the next stack of paper, and then she heard a firm knock on the front door. It was Mr. Pike, the landlord. He wore a clean raincoat and held a folded paper in one hand. He did not come in with his usual slow smile. "Darlene," he said, "I need a minute." She knew at once that something was wrong. He stepped inside, looked around the shop, and did not sit down. "I have to tell you straight," he said. "This building has to be empty by midnight." Darlene stared at him. "Midnight tonight?" "Tonight," he said. "The new owners want it clear. They've got crews coming in before dawn." "You are telling me this on First Friday?" He gave a small shrug, like he was sorry, but not enough to help. "I know it's bad timing. I tried to reach you yesterday." Darlene crossed her arms. "You didn't leave a message. I left one with your answering machine. That machine has not worked in 2 weeks." He looked away for a second. "I'm sorry, Darlene. I really am." She wanted to yell at him. She wanted to throw the folded paper back at his chest. But the front window was full of bright work, and people were already starting to gather outside. So she took a long breath and said, "Where am I supposed to put 10 years of paper, ink, tools, and that press down below?" Mr. Pike did not answer. That was answer enough. He handed her the paper. It was a notice with a neat stamp at the bottom. She did not need to read the whole thing. The words, "empty by midnight," were plain enough. When he left, she stood still for a moment and listened to the music outside. Someone was laughing near the river. A food truck generator hummed. The smell of fried onions drifted through the open door. It all sounded like a normal evening, but the paper in her hand made the room feel smaller. She shoved the notice into her apron pocket and went back to work. There was no other choice. By 7, First Friday was in full swing. Families, art students, tourists, and old neighbors filled the walkway. The brick walls glowed under strings of yellow lights. A watercolor show opened next door. A bluegrass band played under an awning across the street. Rain clouds stacked up over the hills, dark and low, but people kept moving. Darlene sold 3 poster sets in 10 minutes. She sold a stack of postcard prints to a woman from Charlotte who wanted something local. She gave a discount to a young man who said he had just moved to Asheville and was trying to build a guitar shop. Then she heard a voice from the doorway. "You look like you swallowed a nail," said Ben Ortega. Ben ran the frame shop next door. He was a broad man with a beard that never stayed neat and sleeves rolled to the elbow. He held a paper cup of coffee and a wet umbrella. "I got bad news," Darlene said. She showed him the notice. Ben read it once, then again. "Midnight? That's crazy. That's what I said." He gave her a long look. "You need help?" Before she could answer, a rumble of thunder rolled over the river. The first drops hit the roof like handfuls of gravel. Darlene looked up. Maybe just a little. The rain came fast. It went from a light tapping to a hard wall of water in less than a minute. The crowd on the street rushed under awnings and into open doors. Music from the next block turned muddy in the storm. Water ran in silver lines down the brick outside her shop. Then Darlene smelled it. Wet earth, old dust, and something sharp, like the musty smell that comes up from a basement after a long summer storm. She turned and hurried down the back stairs. The basement was already taking water. At first it was just a thin sheet on the concrete floor, shining under the bulb. Then it spread fast, crawling around a stack of cardboard boxes and the legs of a folding table. She shone her flashlight toward the far corner, where the letterpress sat on its steel base. The machine was trapped. A little water was not the problem. The problem was the way the storm drain outside had backed up. Water was pushing under the back door and rising around the feet of the press. The floor around it was wet and slick. The machine itself was heavy enough to need a dolly, and two people just to move it a few feet. Down the narrow stairway? No chance. Not now. Darlene stared at it. The press had a round flywheel, thick iron arms, and a long bed where the paper slid through. It had taken her and two friends a whole day to bring it down there years ago. Now the water was licking at the wooden blocks under its legs. "Ben," she shouted up the stairs. "Get down here." He came 2 steps at a time. Behind him were June Hall from the coffee cart on the corner and Ruth Miller from the ceramic studio upstairs. June had a flashlight in her mouth and a stack of shop towels under one arm. Ruth carried a toolbox and had her hair tied back with a rubber band. Ben looked at the rising water and said, "Tell me we can get it out before it eats the machine." "I don't know," Darlene said, "but we have to try." They went to work at once. Ben fetched a flat dolly from his shop. June dragged in 2 long boards from the alley. Ruth found a pry bar, a wrench, and a roll of duct tape. Darlene shut off the power to the basement and reached for the hand crank she used when the machine needed to be moved. The first try did not work. The press would not move an inch. One wheel caught on a crack in the floor. Water slipped under the rubber feet of the dolly. Ben leaned into it until his face turned red. "Again," he said. They tried again. The machine moved maybe half an inch, then stopped with a low metal squeal. The rain hammered harder on the sidewalk above them. Somewhere overhead, the front door opened and shut again and again, as more people rushed inside to stay dry. Ruth pointed at the basement stairs. "It won't fit." Darlene already knew that. The press was too tall to turn on the landing and too heavy to carry by hand. The back stairway was narrow, with one sharp bend at the bottom. Even if they got it moving, it would jam. "Front window," Ben said. Darlene looked at him. "What?" "The front window. It's wide enough. If we clear the frame, we might get it through the shop." She blinked at him, then at the stairs, then back at the machine. The front display window was the biggest opening in the whole building. It was old but large. The idea sounded wild. It also sounded like the only idea that might work. "How long do we have?" she asked. June wiped rain from her face. "Not much. The street drain is already backing up." Darlene made the call. "Then we do it." The four of them pushed, pulled, and cursed their way up the basement stairs. The press moved by inches. Ben was in front with the dolly handle. Darlene steadied the side. Ruth used the pry bar as a lever when the wheels caught. June shoved from behind with both hands and kept shouting, "Left! A little left!" "No, your other left." They got it into the back room with a loud bump that shook the wall. The front room was full of people now. A few customers had stayed inside from the rain. Others stood at the window and watched the storm turn the street silver. When they saw the machine coming out of the back room, they stepped aside with wide eyes. Darlene pointed to the front window. "Move the table. Clear the rug. Take down the prints." Everything. People started helping at once. A man in a wet baseball cap carried framed art to the back. A woman with purple boots took down a hanging sign. A teenager from the neighboring gallery grabbed a screwdriver and began to work on the window trim. Someone else brought a tarp from a van parked out front. Mr. Pike came back in just as they were pulling the last screws from the display frame. He stopped cold. "What in the world are you doing?" Darlene did not look up. "Saving my machine." "You can't take that out the window." "Watch us." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. A bright line of water slid down the glass behind him. For the first time, he looked worried. Outside, the rain had become a roar. Wind pushed it sideways. The crowd on the street pressed back under the awnings. A few people had started to gather at Darlene's window to see what was happening inside. Their faces glowed in the shop light. Ben and Ruth lifted out the window frame. June held the flashlight high. The opening now looked like a black mouth facing the storm. "All right," Ben said. "On 3. They wrapped the press in old moving blankets and fed 2 long steel pipes under its base. Then they lifted, shifted, and rolled it forward. The machine was so heavy that the floorboards groaned. Darlene could feel it through her shoes. Every inch took all 4 of them. Ben grunted through his teeth. Ruth had one boot braced against the wall. June's arms shook, but she kept her grip. The press inched toward the window. Then it stuck again. The left front wheel caught on the lip of the floor. The machine tilted. For one awful second, Darlene thought it would tip sideways and crush the table by the door. "Hold it," she shouted. Everyone froze. Water ran down the back of Darlene's neck. Her arms burned. The press made a deep creaking sound, like a ship hull under strain. Ben looked at her and said very calmly, "We got one chance. Push on my count." He took a breath. 1, 2, 3. They threw their weight into the machine. The press moved. It slid over the lip, rolled on the pipes, and surged toward the open window with a hard, ugly scrape of iron on wood. Then the front end broke through the frame and out into the night air. For one bright second, the machine was half inside, half outside, with rain blowing around it and the streetlights catching the wet black iron. The people on the sidewalk gasped. Someone cheered. A woman across the street held both hands to her face. Then the last push came. The press lurched through the window and landed with a heavy thud on the tarp outside. Water sprayed off its sides. The old iron body shone black in the storm. The machine sat on the sidewalk like a rescued animal, huge and silent and safe for the moment. The whole block seemed to cheer at once. Darlene leaned against the window frame and laughed out of sheer shock. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the sill to stand upright. Ben slapped the side of the press like he had won a prize. Ruth bent over with her hands on her knees. June let out a loud whoop that mixed with the thunder. Mr. Pike stared at the machine, then at the wet crowd, then at Darlene. "You people are crazy," he said. "Maybe," Darlene said. "But the press is dry." He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. In the end, he only nodded once and backed away from the window. They did not leave the press on the sidewalk. June had already called her cousin Travis, who owned an empty garage 2 blocks away on Lower Pine Street. He had a roll-up door, a dry floor, and a lot of space no one was using. By the time the rain eased a little, Travis pulled up in a box truck with tie-down straps and a flashlight between his teeth. The move took another hour. 4 people pushed. 2 people guided. 2 more kept the blankets in place and watched the wheels. The street was full of puddles. The river smelled strong in the wet dark. Music from the first Friday crowd had gone quiet, but people still stood in doorways and watched the machine travel down the block like a slow parade. A few clapped. One older man took off his hat. A little girl pointed at the iron flywheel and asked her mother what it was. "It's a printing press," the mother said. By the time they reached Travis's garage, the rain had slowed to a soft hiss. They rolled the press inside, set it on blocks, and wiped the water from its legs. Darlene pulled the blanket off the top and ran her hand over the smooth metal side. It was cold, but it was whole. She looked at the clock on her phone. 11:47. There was no time to go back to the old shop, and maybe that was all right. The building on Riverside Drive could empty itself at midnight if it wanted. Her press was here. Her tools were here. Her neighbors were here, wet and tired, and still standing. Travis brought in a folding table. June found a stack of clean paper in the truck. Ben found a can of black ink in one of Darlene's boxes. Ruth opened a window for air and set out a row of cups of water. "Can it print tonight?" Ben asked. Darlene gave the press one long look. Then she smiled in a tired, crooked way. "It can if you stop asking and help me set the type." So they did. They worked fast. Darlene locked the letters into the chase. June rolled ink across the plate. Ben fed in the paper, 1 sheet at a time. Ruth turned the wheel. The machine gave a deep, solid thunk each time it closed. It sounded better than music. On the first sheet, the words came out clean and dark. "Darlene Watkins River Arts Print Shop still here." She held the page under the garage light and laughed again, this time with relief. Outside, the last of the storm moved on toward the mountains. The street was wet, but the rain had stopped. Somewhere down by the river, a train horn sounded low and far away. Darlene pinned the fresh print to the wall above the table. Then she looked at Ben, June, and Ruth. Their clothes were soaked. Their hands were black with ink. They all looked tired enough to sleep standing up. "You know," she said, "I was ready to call this the worst night of my year." Ben snorted. "Give it time. It's not even midnight yet." And June handed her a cup of coffee. You've got a press. You've got friends. That's a good start. Darlene took the cup and looked at the iron machine under the garage lights. It stood solid and safe on its blocks, no longer trapped under dirty water. The night had tried to take it, and the neighborhood had pushed back. At midnight, the old shop on Riverside Drive went dark. At midnight, in a borrowed garage on Pine Street, Darlene Watkins pulled one more clean print from the press and set it on the table to dry.